Mary Shelley took the horror genre by storm with her story of Dr. Frankenstein and his creature. Given the classic nature of this story, obviously it was adapted into movies and plays in subsequent years. Now, we all know that if there is a classic, there will be a parody of it. In 1974, Mel Brooks gave us a timeless comedy classic called Young Frankenstein, where we follow the adventures of Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein's grandson, and Igor, the grandson of, well, Igor. In today's video, we shall take a look at not the doctor, but his lovable, hilarious, and entertaining servant Igor. So get your pitchforks and get ready to riot. We're about to dissect Igor. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Backstory of Igor. Now think about Dr. Frankenstein. Can you imagine him without Igor? Absolutely not. Ever since Bela Lugosi's amazing portrayal of the laboratory assistant in Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein in 1939 and 1942, respectively, it's hard to imagine the story without him. However, would you be surprised if I were to tell you that in the original Mary Shelley novel, there was no Igor? See, Igor was actually a character who was made up just for the Universal Film Studios. He's actually a character who was completely made from scratch by drawing inspiration from various other grimy, slimy characters before him. In the first ever movie, that is 1931 Frankenstein movie with Dwight Fryer, we don't even have an Igor. Here, the Hunch-Backed lab assistant's name is actually Fritz. This Fritz character was inspired by the play adaptation of Frankenstein, titled Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein. But when the public saw this Hunch-Backed lab assistant, their imagination ran wild. So in the third and fourth sequels that I mentioned, Bela Lugosi entered the picture. He played Igor, the blacksmith, who went through a botched hanging, which broke his neck and twisted his back. I don't know how he managed to survive the broken neck, but I shall not question it. In this portrayal of the character, Igor wants to help the doctor because he wants revenge. See, Igor was a grave robber, and when he was caught, the townspeople wanted to hang him. So while he survived, vengeance still lived on within him. In the first movie, we see Igor get shot rather fatally, but don't worry, he'll come back again. In the second movie, Igor's brain is placed inside the monster's body. Now obviously Igor is not a genetic monster, and given how many different parts were put into making this monster, the reactions between the two different blood types were inevitable. The monster's blood and Igor's blood reacted, and this led to the monster being blind, which eventually led to it burning in a chateau fire. Since Bela Lugosi's stellar performance, Universal Studio has decided to actively cement the idea of Igor into the minds of everyone. In 1944, they introduced a husky-backed assistant, the proper kind, in the movie The House of Frankenstein. Here, J. Carroll Naish played this lab assistant named Daniel. He's supposed to be an equivalent of Quasimodo in the story because he falls in love with a Romani dancer who loses interest in him, pushing him into the dark path of grief and revenge. Then, about a decade later, we meet another Igor in the horror film House of Wax from 1953. This is a remake of the 1933 classic Mystery of the Wax Museum, which also had an Igor. So, in the Mystery of the Wax Museum, Igor was the curator of this wax museum. But in the 1953 movie, the name was given to the curator's deaf and mute henchman, played by Charles Bronson. As 1974 rolls around, we get a funnier take on this otherwise dark character with Marty Feldman's portrayal of Igor in Young Frankenstein. He's just following in his grandfather's footsteps and helping Dr. Frankenstein out, but this results in quite a bit of interesting shenanigans, which we'll get to soon. The Igor that I personally grew up with has to be Kevin J. O'Connor's Igor from the 2004 Van Helsing movie. Here, Igor betrayed Dr. Frankenstein and switched sides with Count Dracula, which was honestly a bad career choice, but okay. After this, we got a bunch of Igors in the film Igor. Here in the fictional kingdom of Malaria, there were multiple mad scientists, each of whom had a servant named Igor. The main Igor, whom we follow in the film, voiced by the lovely John Cusack, has a dream. He too wishes to be a mad scientist and create a monster for himself, and as he worked hard enough, he created a monster named Eva. Eva, voiced by Molly Shannon, is a sweet, gentle, and kind monster who wishes to be an actress. As you can imagine, a whole new set of shenanigans follows. Lastly, we got Daniel Radcliffe's version of Igor. Here, the hunchback was caused by a huge cyst, which the doctor drained, curing Igor of his hunchback. So over the years, we can say that there have been quite a few Igors. The main implication of this character is that he's a character who gets mistreated by the townspeople, or is only treated for kidney disease by the doctor, which leads to him joining the doctor in his experiments. But now, the main question of the video: who is the Igor in Young Frankenstein? Played by Marty Feldman, this Igor is unlike any other Igor you've ever seen or ever will see. This one is funny and clownish, but not in a general way. He's clown-like in a Shakespearean way. The comedy comes from his simplicity and the way he delivers his jokes in such a deadpan manner. For those who've missed out on this gem of a movie, this movie is co-written and starred by the amazing and phenomenal Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder plays the passionate, albeit immature scientist, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein. Sorry, Frederick Frankenstein, as he would put it. Frederick hated his his grandfather's work. He thought whatever his grandfather, Victor Frankenstein, went on and on about was nothing but a bunch of hogwash. Hence, to distance himself from his cuckoo grandfather, Frederick insisted that his name was Frankenstein, and that he deserved to be recognized for his small contributions to science instead, and he was willing to go to any length to make his emotion on this matter known, even if it meant stabbing himself with a scalpel in the knee in front of all of his students mid-lecture, because he lost his cool and was flailing his arms around. However, all this nonsense stopped when he was approached by a solicitor for his great-grandfather, Baron Beaufort von Frankenstein. Baron Beaufort von Frankenstein had been dead for a while. The man was like a skeleton, and his solicitor took his will from his coffin and approached Frederick with it. Frederick, who had no idea there was a property in Transylvania, was curious about the castle and decided to travel to Europe to inspect it. Before he leaves, he bids a rather awkward, COVID-friendly goodbye to his fiancée, Elizabeth, played by Madeline Kahn, who refused to let him kiss or hug her because of her nails and makeup. The train journey was short, and when Frederick reached the station, it was deserted. There was fog literally everywhere, and out of the fog came Igor, the hunchbacked assistant played by Marty Feldman, with his complimentary thunderclap. Igor is surprised to learn that this is Frederick Frankenstein and not Frederick Frankenstein. Hearing that you can change the way one pronounces your name by will, Igor insisted that his name was pronounced Igor and not Igor. Once that little bit was done, he decided that it was time to take Dr. Frankenstein to the castle. He reached out for Frankenstein's luggage and soon realized it would be better for him to carry the doctor's briefcase instead. So he picks up the tiny briefcase and started walking down the stairs. Once he'd covered the dangerous 4 steps, he held out his cane for Dr. Frankenstein and told him to walk this way. Dr. Frankenstein soon found himself at the back of a horse-drawn cart, full of hay, with a beautiful woman named Inga, played by Terry Garr, who welcomed him to come and take a roll in the hay. The trip to the castle was interesting, to say the least, with Inga thinking there were werewolves in the jungle, which Frankenstein found surprising. He asked, "Werewolves?" To which Igor replied, "They're wolves, their castle." Clearly, Igor thought Frankenstein was channeling his inner caveman, and wanted to ensure he did not feel alone in his unga-bunga phase. But that illusion was quickly shattered when Frankenstein asked Igor to speak normally. In the castle, we meet the terrifying Frau Buchler. She's so terrifying that every time you say her name, horses start neighing all over the place. As Frankenstein and Inga go inside the castle to check it out, Igor pops his head out for one last Frau Buchler horse neigh sequence, which is hilarious. In the castle, we sense that there's an odd tension between Frau Buchler and Frankenstein, as it's clear she wants the doctor to invite her for a nightcap. As the doctor tries to tell her goodnight, she stalls, leaving his bedchamber offering brandy, milk, and even Ovaltine. But once she realizes that the Frankenstein will not be inviting her to bed, she leaves the bedroom, after giving a shy kiss to the picture of Victor Frankenstein hung on the wall. I sense a romance here. Frankenstein retires to bed for the night, but he's soon awoken by Inga, who woke him up from his terrible nightmare. Once awake, Frankenstein hears this strange violin tune, wafting into his bedroom from behind the wall. Curiosity gets the best of him, and he starts messing around with the bookshelf, trying to figure out the secret passage gateway. After being crushed by the said bookshelf when Inga accidentally triggered the mechanism, the doctor and Inga made their way downstairs, where they met everyone but Igor. Igor had heard the violin too, and followed it down with a dumbwaiter. Together, the trio go through the dusty passageway, with lightning lighting up their way until they reach, you guessed it, Victor Frankenstein's personal library and research lab. Frankenstein is dumbfounded after getting his hands on his grandfather's notes, and realizes that reanimating dead tissue is not at all impossible. With that, he decided he would carry forward his grandfather's legacy. So he and Igor went to get a fresh dead body for the monster. They found an unfortunate thief being hung and buried in the graveyard, and they robbed his body from the grave. On their way back, the coffin broke and the dead body's hand popped out. Right as they were taking care of that business, a policeman showed up. To not trigger any suspicion, Frankenstein pretended the dead body's hand was his own, which was a hilarious sequence. Once the body was back in the castle, the experiment started, and Frankenstein decided he would put the brain of a great scientist, Hans Delbruck, in the monster to make him part of society. Igor was sent to fetch the brain from the brain depository. There, as he was escaping with the brain of the deceased scientist and saint, the sound of thunder and his own reflection startled Igor. He dropped the brain, destroying it. To prevent being scolded, he picked up the brain next to it, labeled abnormal, and returned to the castle. Frankenstein put that brain in the monster and brought it to life with the electrical charges harvested from a lightning storm. The monster, although seeming mute, is calm enough. However, when Igor lights up a match, the monster gets frightened and starts choking the doctor. This leads to a game of charades where the doctor is trying to sign Igor and Inga for sedatives, but they keep thinking he wants a sedative, whatever that is. Finally, after the monster is sedated, the doctor finds out about the brain mix-up. Instead of Hans Delbruck's brain, he gave him Abby Normal's brain. Before this could lead to a fight between the doctor and the assistant, Inspector Kemp showed up at the castle. He was there on behalf of the townspeople to ensure that Frankenstein would not be making another monster like his grandfather. While Frankenstein managed to ensure that the inspector believed him, Frau Buchler was down in the dungeons, freeing the monster. Why? Because she wants her boyfriend's work to be free. That's right, Frau Buchler was Frankenstein's girlfriend. Drama! And because of their affair, she knew that the monster would calm down and follow the violin. So to ensure her lover's project could roam free, she was playing the violin to keep him calm while she untied him. Scandalous. The monster, now outside, made friends with a young girl named Helga, and a blind hermit who burned him with soup and fire by accident. Frankenstein decided to bring the monster back by playing the violin, and then he locked himself in a room with the monster to stop its homicidal tendencies. He complimented the monster on its looks, and when he made a breakthrough with the monster, he decided to guide it to success. This time, finally, Frankenstein accepted himself as a Frankenstein. Frederick took the monster to a theater and demonstrated his ability to be a part of society by making him dance to the musical Puttin' on the Ritz. The performance was going rather well until a stage light exploded. Everyone started booing and throwing vegetables at the monster, which led to the monster charging at the audience. It was captured by the police and taken into custody. As Frederick was distressed over the future of his creation, Inga provided him comfort, both physically and mentally. However, that is when Elizabeth, Frederick's fiancée, decides to show up at the castle. Igor tries to hit on the beautiful Elizabeth, but his charms fall quite short. That night, as Elizabeth brushed her hair in the mirror at the castle, the monster escaped from the police custody. He climbed up the castle walls and kidnapped Elizabeth. When Elizabeth woke up, she found herself in the presence of this giant monster. But before she could get scared, the monster showed her its enormous Schwanzstucker, and Elizabeth was in love. The townspeople, on the other hand, went on a hunt for this monster, but Frederick could not let it die, so he played the violin again and brought the monster to the castle. He recaptured him and decided to do a cerebral spinal fluid transference with him, so that the monster could be more human-like. When the townspeople stormed the castle, the monster was the one who reasoned with them. Surprised by the eloquence of the monster, Inspector Kemp, who was leading the riot with his thick German accent, decided to welcome the monster into town and befriend him. The inspector took everyone out for some sponge cake and wine at the lumber mill, leaving the scientist and his creation alone. As the movie draws to the close, we see that Frederick and Inga are now married, just like Elizabeth and the now erudite monster are. Turns out that the monster got Frederick's intellect, while Frederick got the monster's sexual prowess, making Inga sing the refrain of "Ah, sweet mystery of life," just like Elizabeth did. While all of this happens, our poor boy Igor is seen playing music at the top of the castle, the only thing keeping him company on this lonely night.
Steady!
What does he look like? Whose lineage? With his beady eyes and hump on the back, Igor is no doubt an iconic character. Especially after Marty Feldman's iconic portrayal of the quirky Igor, his role in the Frankenstein universe has become a constant. However, as I've mentioned, he's a canon character. He was, after all, not in Mary Shelley's original work. Then what did it mean when Igor said his grandfather worked with Dr. Victor Frankenstein himself? Well, if you look at the whole trajectory of this role of the Hunchback assistant of Frankenstein, you would notice that this Igor was the first time this stock character was solidified into the whole Frankenstein lore. It's fascinating that the role of Igor was cemented into the audience's heart by a parody movie, saying that our Igor is the grandson of the original Igor, who worked with Victor Frankenstein, perpetuated the idea that yes, of course, there was always this one specific Igor by Frankenstein. While we may not have met the original Igor ourselves, our Igor has done more than enough to win a spot in the hearts of all the fans that Igor was always out there. One would even think that every time a mad doctor was accompanied by a particular looking assistant, he was probably Igor. Despite having read the original novel myself, I too had convinced myself that Igor was there, so you could understand just how iconic and impactful this otherwise unassuming quirky character is. Interesting behind-the-scenes facts about Igor from Young Frankenstein. Given that Gene Wilder co-wrote and starred in this movie, it would come as no surprise to everyone that the jokes that made us laugh throughout this movie were created by Gene Wilder himself. As funny as it was seeing Frankenstein hold Inga in his arms and refer to the bolts of lightning as knockers, only for Inga to quip up with a proud thank you, Igor's dialogues and one-liners are what steal the show. With this funny entry in the movie, accompanied by the thick fog and bright flash of lightning, Igor immediately cemented his place as the quirky assistant, when he insisted his name was Igor if Frederick could go by Frankenstein. Then, as he went down the stairs, he asked Frederick to walk this way. This might sound like he is just pointing out the direction of where to go, but really, Igor wanted Dr. Frankenstein to walk like him in the same hunchback manner he does. It is one of the most memorable gags of not only the movie, but also the entire list of Mel Brooks' works. The director, however, found this joke rather corny when he saw the scene during the editing process. He wanted to cut out the scene entirely. However, he decided to give it a go. Instead of cutting it, he tested it out on audiences audiences. And who would have seen it coming? This gag brought the entire house down. But wait, that's not all. This gag is the inspiration behind the iconic classic Walk This Way by Aerosmith, who saw the movie when they were taking a break from recording. If Mel Brooks had decided to cut this scene out altogether, not only would we have been deprived of the comedic genius of the scene, but we would also have been deprived of the iconic song. So Igor for the win. While this movie is a spoof, a lot of the props in it were from real Frankenstein movies, which gave it a certain surreal feeling. But whenever the scene gets a bit too serious, you can count on a subtle one-liner or a visual gag to break the mood. Like the scene where the trio clamber down the dusty passage to reach an old room, only for the ring on the door to completely disintegrate on being touched. My personal favorite running gag of the movie, however, has to be Igor's hump. The first time Igor and Frankenstein met, Frankenstein told Igor that he would be able to fix the hump as he was a doctor. But Igor hit him with the "what hump?" which was enough to dumbfound him. After that scene, whenever you see Igor, you'll notice that there's nothing consistent about his hump. In every scene, his hump is hopping all over his back. And this gag was not planned at all. The amazing Marty Feldman decided to move around his hump from scene to scene as a joke, and he did it so discreetly that it took the crew quite a while to actually catch on to it. Now this was a practical joke that Feldman played on the crew, but Mel Brooks enjoyed it so much that he put it in the movie. And we get the iconic scene where Frankenstein asks Igor why his hump is on the wrong side. Marvelous verdict. Overall, Young Frankenstein is a lovely idea that came out of Gene Wilder's head, and I'm glad that this movie was made. Marty Feldman's Igor is such a believable and lovable take on the assistant, and seeing him paired with the wild, immature, and childish Frankenstein is the dynamic we need. Also, Igor is often seen breaking the fourth wall in the movie, which reminded me so much of our favorite Merc with a Mouth that I really have to recommend this movie to you guys if you haven't seen it. Let us know in the comments if you've seen the movie, and if there is a gag that is your favorite, and until next time, take care. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.